Welcome to part 4 of the Goulet Pens Fountain Pen 101 series. I am Brian Goulet, and in this video, we're going to be building upon the foundation set in the first 3 Fountain Pen 101 videos, where we covered what a fountain pen is, the parts that make up a fountain pen, and how to clean and maintain them. Today, I'll be going over the single most important part of a fountain pen when it comes to your writing experience, the nib. Nibs can both look and perform differently from one pen to another. They can be fairly basic and utilitarian, almost hidden away unnoticeable, or they can be large, prominent, and ornate and really stand out. For the purpose of this video, know that when I'm talking about nib size, I'm referring to the size of the line width that will show on the paper, like a fine or broad, not the physical overall size of the entire nib. Like any hobby, you're gonna notice more of the nuanced differences in fountain pen nibs as your knowledge and experience grows. So I won't cover everything here, but I'll at least cover the basics so that you know what's most important to pay attention to as you learn about fountain pens. First things first, let's cover the fundamentals of how nibs work. The nib is the crucial element that delivers the ink to the paper and influences what your writing will actually look like on the page. The reason the nib is so important is because it's the part of the pen that actually touches the writing surface. It'll determine the feel of the pen as you write, it affects how thin or thick your line width is, and it impacts how much ink flows to the paper. It's doing a lot of really important jobs at once. Nibs can look pretty different from one pen to another, and there are a few types that you might find out there. The classic fountain pen nib probably is recognizable to you, as this is what's often shown in pop culture references with fountain pens. You'll see the entire nib and feed exposed from the grip of the pen in their full glory. Pens can also have hooded nibs, where the nib and feed are mostly covered by the grip of the pen. The advantage of this design is that the ink stays wetter on the nib, and you can grip closer down to the nib without getting ink on your fingers. While retractable refills are extremely common in ballpoint and rollerball pens, the mechanics of a fountain pen make this more of an engineering feat. But there are a couple of retractable nib pens out there that have many of the benefits of the hooded nib. There are also pens with inlaid nibs, which integrate the nib more into the body of the pen. These are mainly for aesthetics, but they look pretty cool. Whatever style of nib that you see, there is a similar format to their design in order for them to bring ink to the page. Let's cover the basic parts of a nib that are helpful to understand. You have the body, which is what fits into the pen and holds it in place. But it's usually hidden inside the grip, so you don't think about it much. The face usually has the company logo. It may designate the material that it's made of, and it'll usually show the nib size, which is a helpful reference. There's a cut in the nib called the slit, which is where the ink travels as it flows to the tip. On many nibs, there's a hole at the end of the slit called the breather hole, but it's not going to be there on every pen as it's mainly aesthetic. The two halves of the nib created by the slit are called the tines, and those are precisely adjusted to be aligned with each other so that the nib feels smooth as it glides across the page. And that brings us to the tip, or the tipping material of the nib. This is the most crucial part of the nib. The tipping material is made of a hard-wearing alloy, including precious metals like rhodium. This offers maximum durability, since the tip is what will be making contact with the paper as you write for years and years. The tip is welded on and ground down to a specific nib grind, or nib size, that will determine the line width that you end up with as you write. When you see a nib size designation on a nib, it's referring to the size and shape of that tipping material. When you're using different fountain pens, you'll notice that there are some common nib sizes that'll give you thinner or thicker line widths. There are some principles that are helpful to keep in mind no matter which nibs that you use. Now there's always a trade-off with nibs, and no one nib is right for everyone. It'll be a highly personal choice, and it's sometimes hard to know what you're going to like until you experience it for yourself. I encourage you to try out as many different nibs as possible to get an idea of what you're gonna like. If you have any friends or family with fountain pens, try all of theirs if you can. Otherwise, just try out some less expensive pens you get on your own in various nib sizes so that you can get a sense of what's best for you. The smaller the nib size, the thinner the line that it puts down. Finer nibs put less ink on the paper, so it'll smear less and dry faster. That's especially helpful if ink smearing is an issue, such as if you're a left-handed writer who might move their hand over the writing. Finer nibs are also better for small handwriting and writing on paper with smaller ruling, such as a 5mm dot grid. On the flip side, finer nibs won't feel as smooth as you write, since they have a smaller surface area on the tip. The fact that they put less ink down means that you won't see special ink properties as well as you would with broader nibs. Now, broader nibs, on the other hand, they're great for showing these special ink properties, and they usually feel smoother. But you can run into issues with ink spreading out, absorbing through the paper, smearing, and taking longer to dry. Whether you prefer finer or broader nib sizes will honestly come down entirely to your preferences and how you like to write, and your preferences can change over time too. Some of the most popular nib sizes that you'll see available on modern fountain pens include extra fine, fine, medium, and broad, which are all shaped with a round ball tip. Extra fine is a good nib size to consider if you're newer to fountain pens, especially if you're writing on really absorbent paper like inkjet printer paper or legal pads. These nibs are ideal if you like to write small or if you enjoy paper with a narrow ruling. If you like writing with the .38 ultrafine Pilot G2, you might like extra fines. Now, fine nibs are what I like to recommend as the go-to nib size for everyday writing. You get a lot of the benefits of extra fines, but it often feels noticeably smoother on the page than extra fines do. This is often the most popular nib size for fountain pens that we sell across most brands. It's just an all-around good nib size. If you like writing with a .5 extra fine Pilot G2, you'll like fine nibs. Medium nibs are a bit broader than the fine nibs, and you'll start to get a bit thicker and wetter writing, which is going to show off the ink properties better than the fines and extra fines. If you're writing on college ruled paper, medium nibs still fit, but it may start to feel a bit crowded, so going to 8mm standard ruling feels a little roomier. Mediums are a size that I really like for when I have inks that have a high sheen or shimmer properties, as I think that it shows off the writing aspects that are most unique to fountain pens, while still being pretty universal on most types of paper. If you write larger, if you have a heavier hand, or you really want to see your ink, mediums are good for you. If you like to use the .7 fine Pilot G2, you'll probably like medium nibs. Now, broad nibs are some of my favorites because they're going to feel the smoothest and put down the most ink of all the standard nib sizes. They're not nearly as popular as finer nib sizes though, as they start to feel pretty crowded on smaller paper rulings. If you have absorbent paper, it'll put down a pretty wet line, and you might have more of a risk of bleed through where the ink soaks through the back of the page. However, when you have a beautiful ink and you can use high quality ink resistant paper, it's gonna look and feel amazing when you use broad nibs. Stub nibs, sometimes called Italic nibs, are sort of a different beast. Instead of being shaped to a round ball at the tip, they're ground flat across the bottom. This results in an irregular line width that's thinner on the cross stroke and thicker on the downstroke. It gives your writing a bit of a calligraphic effect, sort of like a Gothic script. Stub nibs can come in a variety of sizes, including some that are absolutely massive. But the most popular and most usable for everyday writing will be a 1.0mm or 1.1mm, which is usually the standard in most brands. Now, because the tip isn't round, it means that stubs are more sensitive to rotation of the pen in your hand, so you have to sort of get used to writing with them. But when you do, it can make your handwriting look more impressive without really having to do anything different with your writing. Now, one thing I'll pause and mention here is that nib sizes are somewhat of a standard, but there's a lot of hand craftsmanship involved in shaping the tipping of a nib, and each manufacturer may do it a little bit differently. So while you generally prefer, say, extra fine nibs, you may find with certain brands you actually prefer a fine nib because the way that that company makes their fine is closer to the extra fine, maybe in another brand that you're used to. It's a little confusing. It's sort of like shoe sizes, where it can vary a little bit from one brand to another, but you kind of get the idea. One of the most noticeable differences that you may find is with extra fine and fine nibs from Japanese manufacturers like Pilot, Sailor, and Platinum, and how they're going to be ground finer than the extra fine and fine nibs from Western manufacturers based in Germany, Italy, France, and the UK. Most of the reason for this is because it's more of a standard nib size offering in Japan to have a nib size called medium fine, or maybe fine medium. And while that's not very common with Western brands. So in order to make room for these medium fines, the fine and extra fine are made a bit thinner, and thus you get some variance across these brands. If you're looking at mediums, broads, and stubs though, they're going to be more of a standard across all brands. Now there are a number of other specialty nib sizes beyond the 5 that I've mentioned here, but they start to get a bit specific and aren't regularly available in most brands. Some fountain pen manufacturers feature more specialized grinds and have wide offerings unique to them, but the ones I mentioned so far here are the ones that are more universally available. One extremely helpful tool that we've developed at Goulet Pens is something that we call the Nib Nook, which is going to show scans of writing samples that I've personally done with every nib size from every model of every brand of pen that we carry. You can compare them to each other, or you can reference a nib that you already have and compare it to something else maybe that you're interested in. It's a great way to see the actual line width of a writing on paper. Fountain pen nibs have a hard job. They need to hold up to years of use with prolonged contact with ink and have just the right properties of stiffness and flexibility so that they're durable, but they also feel good in your hand. Over the many decades fountain pens have been around, pen companies have tried darn near everything out there for making nibs. The two materials that have stood the test of time and dominate all modern pens are stainless steel and gold. Stainless steel nibs in recent years are really quite good and are much more economical. They're often stiffer feeling than gold nibs, but they're reliable, durable, and they can write every bit as smoothly as gold nibs if the attention is given to them at the manufacturer. Stainless steel nibs are the standard these days for most fountain pens. Because it's the standard, you often won't see any designation for steel on the nib face, it's just kind of assumed. However, the nib itself can be made of steel but plated in gold or another finish so that it looks a different color, but it'll still write exactly the same as a regular steel nib. The other alternative is gold nibs, and these can come in different levels of gold purity. 14 karat and 18 karat are the most common, with 21 karat even being available by one brand, Sailor. The main advantage to gold nibs over stainless steel is that gold is softer. If two nibs are of the same design, the gold nib will write with a bit of bounce to it, acting a little bit like a shock absorber on your car that just helps to smooth out the ride. A steel and gold nib can both have the same tipping smoothness, but the gold might just feel a little smoother because of the softness of the metal. All gold nibs are yellow gold, so when a silver aesthetic is desired, they're often plated in rhodium. You can usually tell that nibs are gold because they're gonna designate that on the face of the nib with the karat rating of the gold. Now that said, gold nibs come at a price, since gold is significantly more expensive than steel. You'll often pay an additional $150 or more for a fountain pen just for that gold nib. There's a certain panache with gold nibs that you'll see them offered more as a default on pens costing hundreds of dollars or more. Some pens are offered with both steel and gold nib options at different price points, but usually it's gonna be one or the other based on the pen model. However, gold nibs are certainly not a requirement, and just because a nib is made of gold doesn't inherently mean it's better or that you'll like it more. If you're just starting out, stick with stainless steel nibs until you get more experience and you can even tell the difference in the feel. It's sort of like getting a taste for wine. When you're new to it, it's not worth spending a lot of money on the expensive wine because you're not gonna pick up on all the, subtle notes. It's the same with fountain pens. The more you get into it, the more you'll appreciate the nuances of some gold nibs. The last thing I want to cover is some terminology around nibs and how they're performed that I think will be helpful for you. Feedback, tooth, or toothiness, they all describe how the nib feels on the page as you write. If it glides across the paper, it's really smooth. But if you feel some drag as you write, that's called feedback or tooth. This feeling is going to vary depending on how the manufacturer smooths the nib. It's going to vary based on the paper that you're writing with, your writing pressure, and a number of other factors. Each person has their own preference too. Scratchy nibs are when there's something wrong and it's actually digging into the paper. It could be misaligned tines, it could be a nib that's maybe overflexed and now the tines won't come back together, or some other physical issue that's just off. No nibs should be scratchy, and if it is, you'll want to contact either where you got it from or consider getting it repaired or serviced. Flow refers to the viscosity of the ink through the nib. A dry writing pen will put down less ink, so the color will be weaker and you'll feel more feedback. A wet writing pen will gush ink out. It'll look darker and it'll take a little longer to dry. While the flow of a pen varies by pen model and even nib size, you'll also find that the ink itself will have different flow. So you can fine-tune your flow by trying different inks and different pens too. Bounce refers to the stiffness of a nib. If you press on it and see if it bends. It might also be called spring. Flex nibs are made so that when you write with light pressure, the tines stay together and you get the line width of the tipping size. But the tines of the nib are made to bend under pressure so that you can widen your line width as you press down, and then you thin your line as you lighten with the pressure. It adds a whole other dimension to your writing, which can be a lot of fun, but I will say it's not the easiest thing to get into if you're new to fountain pens. It introduces a number of additional variables, and I think it's best to maybe try to wait and do flex nibs until you have a solid understanding of fountain pens and you feel comfortable troubleshooting various issues with ink flow. Soft nibs are somewhere in between regular stiff nibs and flex nibs. Most soft nibs can bend a little bit for a bouncier writing feel, but they don't necessarily provide you with any variance in your line width as you add pressure. Other soft nibs may provide you with some line variation, but it should be used sparingly, like for your signature. If you flex them hard on a regular basis, you could end up wearing the nib out and needing to repair it. So I'm gonna go ahead and cap it off here. There is so much more nuance to fountain pen nibs, and part of the joy of the fountain pen journey is getting to experience different nibs, pens, ink, and paper. Taking what you've learned in this video, you're gonna be in a lot better shape than I was when I first started out. And I hope that you feel empowered to try some different nibs and see what you like for yourself. Feel free to ask some questions in the YouTube comments on this video. You can reach out to my team at Goulet Pens, and check out gouletpens.com for the Nib Nook and lots of other information about these magnificent writing instruments. Thank you so much for watching, and write on.